Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for our third session of the Inner and Outer Work of Social Justice with Professor Rhonda Magee and Marissa Rodriguez, who's our USF Class of 2008 alum. My name is Carolyn Knowles, and I'm the Interim Director of Development and Alumni Relations here at USF School of Law. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to the recording after the program. Rhonda and Marissa will be in conversation for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then they'll open it up to your questions. Feel free to submit your questions at any time through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. This program will run for 1 hour, so it will run until 5 p.m. Pacific time. And with that, I would like to introduce today's speakers. Professor Rhonda Magee has taught at USF School of Law for over 20 years, tenured since 2004. She is a nationally recognized thought and practice leader in the emerging fields of contemplative legal education and law practice and contemplative teaching in higher education. She's the author of numerous articles on mindfulness in the practice of law, and her first book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, was published in 2019. It's fantastic. I'm about halfway through. Really great book. She is also chair of the board of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society and a member of the Project for the Integration of Spirituality, Law, and Politics, and a contributor to mindful.org. Marissa Rodriguez is the director of the Office of Cannabis for the City and County of San Francisco. In this capacity, she oversees the permitting process for all businesses that cultivate, manufacture, distribute, sell, and test cannabis in San Francisco, focusing on access for medical cannabis patients and equitable participation for those negatively impacted by the war on drugs. Prior to this, Marissa was an assistant district attorney and director of community relations for the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. She created the truancy pilot program, I Am the Change, to re-engage truant youth in education through the lens of the civil rights movement. And she also co-founded the San Quentin News Forum, the first forum of its kind to take several San Francisco law enforcement agencies, and most recently, the Office of Cannabis, inside the walls of the California State Prison. Marissa grew up in San Francisco, and she graduated from USF Law in 2008. Thank you so much for joining us, and I really look forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, oh, welcome, welcome. Thank you, first of all, to Carolyn and to Julie, who's behind the scenes, helping us with the platform today. On behalf of the University of San Francisco School of Law, I want to just welcome everybody to this conversation. In particular, I want to welcome and thank my friend and former student and now esteemed alum of our institution, Marissa Rodriguez. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. And as I'm sure many of your students currently can imagine that the relationship they established and developed with you over the years will remain. Continue to feel a deep connection to Professor Magee. I still call her Professor Magee. I invited her to come speak to my colleagues just last year and couldn't stop referring to you as such because that's what you'll always be in my heart. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. And speaking of our hearts, I think many of us come to this conversation today, with a little bit of heaviness in the heart. On the one hand, we're gratified to have the support of this community and the community of practice in law and our network of folk with whom we work and the work. I'm sure you've got a beautiful network of supporters in the work that you're doing on behalf of the city right now. And so I'm looking forward to hearing about that. I mean, about that evolution from working for the prosecutor's office to working now directly for city management and all the different skills and all the things you're drawing on from your legal experience and law school experience. I'm curious to hear about that. But before we go into that, just really wanting to name that, here we are. It's March 2021, and we are, many of us are aware that this week, somewhere around this week, marks about a year of our really being in serious adaptation mode to sometimes lockdown type circumstances to deal with the coronavirus. And that's just one pandemic. We know there is that interlocking pandemic of economic consequences for all of this, in conjunction with the physical health vulnerability, the public health crisis we've been dealing with, the impact that's had on economies in our families, in our communities, in our schools. And at the same time, there is this racial injustice pandemic that we're living with as well. And right now, in particular, on this day, many of our hearts are broken because we saw video not only of things happening across the country, like in Georgia, the incident that happened there, the recent shooting targeting Asian community businesses and workers, Asian women in particular, Asian American women. But we've seen incidents right here in the city too. So again, just naming that when we come together, there's a lot that we come together with. And I just want to ask how you're doing. We're going to do a little bit of a meditation just to sort of support us landing. But how do you come into this conversation? How are you bearing up with all of those different pressures?
Thank you. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This week marks a lot of things, and we continue to be reminded of the social injustices that continue to exist in our society. As we're coming on 1 year of this pandemic, and at a time and in a space where a lot of things have recently reemerged for a number of reasons. And even in my own experience, personally, I found myself experiencing just feelings of heaviness and anxiety around the beginning of the year. And maybe it was because I somehow thought, 2021 was going to mark some big, massive change from the year before. I think it did symbolically, but certainly not much, was going to change. And I knew that, and there was still much work to be done in so many places, including this rollout of vaccine and all the conversations we were having around racial equity, just a number of things, a number of moving parts. But one of the things that I think continues to ground me is my team at the Office of Cannabis. And I know we're going to speak a little bit about that, but really the members of my team, we are small but mighty, 7 folks come together on this issue, and coming from very different backgrounds, but really being driven to the work. And the individuals in this space are just really thoughtful and take the time to be in the moment and take the time to appreciate the privilege of the work that we're doing now and in this moment. And I think that's really helped me feel grounded. And it's purposeful. It's creating spaces that we have the fortune of doing day to day. But when something like today happens, for example, or like something like the incident you mentioned in Atlanta, we can speak as colleagues and share. And I just got off a talk earlier today with 2 of my colleagues who aren't Asian, right? But who just really felt like a real strong need and desire to have space to talk about that. And so that helps me. And I continue to just feel really grateful that I have such a remarkable team.
Well, thank you so very, very much. I love that you mentioned the importance of those relationships that ground us in the actual professional work that we're doing in the world, but that you're naming this ability to connect, to be present with what is happening, to pause and take time to check in, and to see the potential for making a difference from where we are in the moment. In the present, and be present with all of that, the whole range, the difficult and the opportunity. I think in a way, just in a nutshell, you just named how it is that I think the justice work of the future might be strengthened by this more holistic understanding of what it means to be of service in the world, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
it was actually one of my colleagues. Oh, sorry, it was one of my colleagues that named just that. Nikesh, who I work with, who said the importance of being in the present that sort of intersectionality that, you know, of mindfulness and the work that we do in this space, social justice, right?
Yeah.
And you need to just stop and take it in and not react until you're ready. Certainly react and acknowledge, but that this is what's important. And it's nice to get that from my team members.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, so speaking of which, if you're willing, as we talked about before in advance, I'd love to just offer a moment for us to kind of land a little bit more in this conversation, drop a little bit more and feel the ground of support beneath us by doing a bit of practice here at the outset. And I invite those who've been kind enough to join us on this call, welcome, and we're so glad you're here. And if you're willing as well, this will be an offering for you too. And this will be a relatively informal kind of meditation practice. I use a bell just because, you know, I have one and, and it actually helps me. But of course, we don't need a bell. We don't need any of that. Really, it's just about answering that inner bell within us, that indication that we sometimes have from, oh, our heartbeat feeling a little bit raised or some anxiety, a cloud of sadness coming over us. Sometimes we'll get an inner sense that we might benefit from pausing, from taking a moment for ourselves, from bringing some kindness and self-care to our day. And so if you're willing, let's let this moment together be one of those for us. I'll ring this bell and I'll lightly guide us for a few moments of just sitting and reconnecting with our inner resources for bearing up no matter what comes in our day. So just taking a few moments to feel the ground beneath us and feel the body in this sitting posture where many of us are seated. You might be standing or walking as you listen to this. But the invitation is to just pause and just feel the goodness of your life in this moment. Feeling the points of contact between the body and the ground. And as you sense the body as a whole and allow a kind of just a gentle, kind appreciation for what is well within you, inviting and attending to the sensations of breathing in and just breathing out. And expanding the awareness to hold, again, the body as a whole as you breathe in and out. So allowing that spacious quality to be known and felt. Again, just feeling the support of a conscious breath. So perhaps on the picking up on the in breath or the out breath, wherever you happen to be. Feeling, just noticing what happens as you breathe in and out. Noticing the impact of a cleansing conscious breath, perhaps on the brain, the sense of wakefulness, alertness. And just letting go and relaxing, letting go of thought for the moment, perhaps imagining thoughts falling away and falling into the earth, which can hold them, or floating away as a cloud might against the blue sky, and just resting in this moment. We all are so bereft of rest, I think. Just taking a moment to rest together here. And as we do so, perhaps calling to mind the intentions we bring for our being here together, for coming together for this conversation, where we might think about the work we do from a holistic place. Think about the communities we serve, not only about their material and substantive needs, their legal needs, their academic needs, and other, but really to think about the communities we serve holistically, and how just pausing sometimes and creating more space for connection might be a benefit, not only for ourselves, but for those whom we're privileged to serve as well. So as we draw this meditation to a close, just really wanting to offer the extra support of a dedication and a sense of, we do this work with a sense of purpose. Again, thinking about our intentions to help serve the world as we move forward into this conversation together.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, again, it's always a pleasure to see you. I'm thinking of all of the years ago that we first met at the University of San Francisco, and I had the pleasure of working with you as a student in my classes. And then fast forward some years after you graduated, I remember learning that you're working for the city in the office of the prosecutor at that time as an assistant DA, member of the DA's office, and working with you a bit to help create space for community processing of some difficult, really, that was remember the text message controversy, or the
That's
email,
right?
Remember that? The controversy, right? Around race and racism amongst some police officers that got revealed in some of their social media exchanges. And so we've come together in different ways over the years. And so I'd love it if you could talk. I've gotten a chance to know you a little bit, but I wonder if you could share a little bit of your journey into law, a little bit of your backstory, how you came into being a lawyer, deciding to go to law school, but also how you decided to choose to go to work on behalf of the city and to do the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, wow. Certainly not a straight line, right? I didn't wake up one day saying I was going to be a lawyer. I certainly didn't wake up one day saying I would be a prosecutor. I grew up in San Francisco, really consider myself an inner city kid, had a single parent mom. She raised me on her own. And if anything, I think I was probably attracted to things that, felt more like social justice in nature, something civil rights in nature. But I said something along the lines of maybe I'd be interested in medicine, and there it was. I was going to be a doctor. And so for a very long time, that was the path I was on through college, actually. And it wasn't until maybe midway through college when I realized, that wasn't my dream, that was a family dream. And I started having to think of how I was going to pivot. And that pivot brought me actually to business school. It felt practical. It felt like, well, I could graduate with a decent job. Maybe I'd be, an accountant. Maybe I'd be an investment banker. I don't know. Let me just explore this. I would leave that actually none of those things. I would be interested in journalism. And it was, brings me to a story that I would, work. I got an internship with Channel 2 News. Dennis Richmond was the anchor back then. I'm dating myself.
Me too. I remember this.
And I remember, working with him, I made a tape, did the whole thing, and I was interested in actually television journalism. And at that time, there was, and I don't know if it's still the case, but there was an event that would happen about every 4 years called Unity. And it would bring together journalists of color. And I think they'd host it around the country. And that year, which I think was 2005, 2004, was during the, I believe, Kerry Bush, years campaign. And so I was out, it was hosted in Washington, DC that year. So I remember going out and thinking, okay, I'm gonna shop my tape. I'm gonna get to this great opportunity. There's an expo. I'm gonna meet all these people. It's gonna be great. Well, it was interesting because at this time, there was a shift in how people took news and, how they sought it, how they, wanted to get it. And people were moving away from local networks and more into sort of those network channels, and CNN and onward. Like this was the space in which people were getting their news. So there weren't just new on the scene journalists at this event. There were pretty seasoned journalists shopping their tapes, and it was kind of a little overwhelming for a newbie, and kind of thinking to myself, oh wow, this is gonna be a lot harder than I thought. So I'm walking around this giant expo. It was focused on getting to the CNN booth, right? And the line was wrapped around. And like I said, seasoned journalists, all these different people in this line. So I started to think, okay, plan B, what else is here that I find interesting? And I saw the booth for Court TV. And I thought, well, that's interesting. At that time, things like Forensic Files and those shows were on Court TV, right? Hollywood Heat and things like that. So I thought, oh, I like that network. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go over there, the line is shorter. So I'm standing in line and I feel this tap on my shoulder. I look over and there's this man. It's like, wait a minute. Are you who I think, what? And he says, are you interested in Court TV? And I said, yes. And I had my resume, like I said, I had my tape in hand. And he yells to the woman at the booth with the exhibit behind her and says, hey, Jennifer. So he knew her. What is this, apartheid South Africa? She turns blush red. This, pointing to me, this woman, she's the future of Court TV. Talk to her.
Wow.
And he walks off. Now, mind you, the expo panel or display was just a bunch of old white judges. None of the shows, which I thought was really funny, but just kind of these old men on the back. And mind you, this is a thing called Unity, and it's this event it's a diversity event. And so it was kind of misplaced. So I understood what he said, but it was pretty shocking. And so she felt kind of embarrassed, and she kind of ushers me to the front of the line, looks at my resume, and then says, when can you start?
Well, now, but can I back you up for a second?
Who was it?
Man, was this somebody you knew? Or
it was the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who would then walk off and change the trajectory of my life forever.
Wow.
And certainly my career.
Wow.
So she looks at it, Jennifer Randolph, and I'll never forget her because we established a relationship at that point. It was pretty shocking, right? Mm-hmm. And she asks me when I can start. And I said, wow, this is interesting, with the position, we're kind of talking about it. Where are you located? New York, New York. So I would move across country and start working at Court TV.
Wow.
Where I would work on a segment called Hollywood Heat with Joan Rivers.
I didn't even know this part of your history.
Yeah. And it's like Entertainment Tonight meets Crime and Justice. And
wow.
So this is where the world of DAs and defense attorneys and judges and pretty much every single person at this network were former lawyers, some of counsel, something. And I thought, well, this is really fascinating. And so it was in that space that I kind of got interested, and I thought, well, okay, I'll apply to law school. And that will bring me back home, because I was feeling a little homesick, and I thought I want to come back and enter USF law school, and that's where the interest came, and I ended up going. And it would be a series of pretty influential USF law grads that would then continue to have an impact on my career trajectory.
Wow.
The first being Eric Fleming, who is now on our bench, Superior Court bench. And he, at the time, he was a homicide DA for the district attorney's office. I was his intern, and I would sit second chair on a homicide case with him.
Wow.
And it was in this case, mind you, like I said, I didn't wake up, a woman of color, growing up in the city, thinking I'm going to be a prosecutor when I grow up. Can't wait till that happens, right?
Right.
And it was a really remarkable experience, very eye-opening, from sitting from voir dire to verdict on a homicide case where the defendant was my cohort, was somebody of my age who I knew where they grew up and had a sense of a lot of things about them. And I struggled with parts of that process in that case. I grew a lot during that case. One thing that I think really set this experience apart for me was watching my boss and mentor, Eric, navigate this process. And one of the things I did see, this person, this defendant in this particular case, like I mentioned, was young, in his mid-20s at the time. He didn't have much of a record. But what had happened is he found himself on the wrong side of a second-degree murder charge. So he was facing 25 to life because he had gotten high on drugs, he had been drinking, and really wanted to gain entry into his family's home to see his daughter, who had been estranged from him and his wife. So he decided the way in was to shoot through the lock on the door. The bullet ricocheted off that lock through the heart of his stepmother. Oh. And his stepmother's dying utterance was his name, essentially. And that was this case, and then he was on the run. Watching my boss at the time, right, take this case, and he let me in on a lot of different aspects. And one of them was sitting in with his boss to try to get to a place where this young man could have some sort of life. Maybe, 25 to life wasn't it, but some other deal, like maybe 15, which really was kind of unheard of, that someone would go out on a limb for a young man like this, who had grown up in the hood, who really didn't have anyone championing for his case and his cause. I thought that was really powerful. And I think it was in that moment where it's sort of this idea of discretion and at what point in your career it comes and when you can really make change became very clear to me. And so when we were done with this case, and unfortunately, he actually didn't take this plea deal. Somebody, I think a family member, came out of the woodwork and really pushed him to take the case forward. And to be honest, I don't know, and I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to be told, hey, how about 15 years, And for my boss, it was really an opportunity to say, hey, you could be, you could be in, you'd be out on good behavior, and your daughter would be maybe 15 years old or so, 16, when you got out, and you could perhaps have a relationship, something. And I just, like I said, I can't imagine, but he didn't end up taking the deal, and we went through with the case, and he was found guilty in 25 years to life. And as I was going up the elevator back to the offices with the head detective in that case, who's about a 30-year vet, he turns to me and he says, "So Marissa, what's it going to be? The public defender's office or corporate law?" And I thought, had I stumbled into bad lighting? What happened? I've been on this case this entire time. Like, what happened? So I rush over to speak to Eric, and I say, "Hey, what was that about? He said this thing to me." And he's like, he's an investigator. He's a homicide detective. He's been on this for years, and he can read people. And he's seen you, just process this case and have compassion for the defendant and experience this in a way. And he said, in fact, in a way that I think means you should really consider being a prosecutor. You should be a DA for that very reason. So it was in that moment I realized, you know what? Okay, I get it, right? I see what you're saying. And from this vantage point, from this position, I could really eventually, when I get there, make change. I would go on to actually go to a law firm, to a firm, corporate, like he kind of said, just really as a means to an end, put a dent in my law school debt. And when the opportunity came up to return, I jumped at it.
How long were you, by the way, working at the firm?
For a little over a year, and then came over. And actually, it was right at the downturn, the mortgage crisis, right? So very much a similar economic feeling as now. There was a hiring freeze. I think perhaps even a little more aggressive at that time. And so I came in as a volunteer. So I left a very high-paying job to go and not be paid and to kind of prove myself, so to speak. Wow. And it was an incredible experience. And then eventually 5 months later, I would be hired and sworn in by our now Vice President, Kamala Harris. I think it was probably one of the last there's myself and another colleague who were sworn in by her before she went off to campaign for the state level AG.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, remarkable. And to kind of get to that point, that was sort of the path for me. I would try cases for a while, and then George Gascon came on scene, and he came with some very, very, different. Kamala was certainly a very progressive prosecutor, and I think it's really important to acknowledge the time frame too, and what she was up against, and being kind of the first to make a lot of changes in the space and to bring that idea of being smart on crime and data driven at a time when she started, we didn't even have, I think the office didn't have computers and something crazy. I mean, it was so archaic back then, and it wasn't that long ago, right?
Yes, I remember.
Wild. And so George came in with even more, kind of pushing the envelope a little bit more. And one of the things that he came to the office with was this idea that seasoned prosecutors should really be stationed at all the different precincts in the city. And they should be learning what's truly driving crime, and not only driving crime at that level, but what matters to the community. So if you go and you interview folks in different parts of San Francisco, and you say, where are our biggest challenges around crime? At that time, the answer wasn't violent crime. And in fact, today we have the lowest numbers of violent crime that the country, I think, has even seen since the 70s, right? The 80s. And those days, it was wild. We really aren't experiencing high levels of violent crime, but property crime, quality of life crimes, these crimes, drug crimes have skyrocketed. And that's what we were hearing. And so that was different than the real focus that siloed prosecutors sometimes experience, right? Where you're just like, oh, no, these are the things that matter to people, and this is what. Now, certain parts of the community felt that way for sure. Yes. But others didn't. So it was really important to get a better sense of what people were experiencing. So it was at a time when I was would be transitioning into a unit that was specialized, whether it be sex assault, whether it be gangs, right? With this idea that one day I'd get back to homicide. And the big boss comes into the office, and that was sort of what would happen. Like, oh, you got to go talk to so-and-so, it's time. Oh, what's it going to be? What's my new assignment going to be? And I go in, and they're like, George Gascon would like you to run neighborhood courts, or, the neighborhood prosecutor program. Again, I've stumbled into some bad lighting. What is that, right? And I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, what did that mean?
What does that mean? And so, it turns out that one of the things that make you very successful in that realm and sort of being a neighbor prosecutor is actually having a real strong sense of the community, and having been from here and grown up in San Francisco, I had strong ties. I had strong ties to the police department. I had strong ties to community organizations and just community members and people, and feeling really connected in that way. And so that was one of the things that was sort of a prereq. Yeah. Okay, I fit the prereq, I fit the mold. So I actually made an appointment with George. I hadn't talked to him. He didn't know me from Adam, but I was like, what's this about? Right. And I will never forget, he was laughing like halfway through, like most of this meeting, like, oh, of course, you have no idea, your career is so long, this is you won't even believe what a great opportunity this is. And he was really right. He was right. It was actually very exciting. And the first time I really felt like a prosecutor in my mind, where I'm hand in hand with the police department, working with them as they gather evidence in their cases, feeling very close to the process, but at the same time, certainly, towing that line, being really close to the community and getting a sense of what mattered to them. It is here where I started to develop programs, things like the San Quentin, project, and the Truancy project, because, I was actually assigned to District 3, right? District 3. So Chinatown is there, Fisherman's Wharf, all of our touristic neighborhoods. And during the summertime, truant youth would come and just raid the businesses and steal and carry on. And that was an issue. And nobody who knew, right? But that was something that was going on, and steal the tip jar money and things like that, like just young people bored and trying to get into trouble. And I started
tell us about the program that you found.
So I started thinking about like, well, how do you re-engage truant youth? And that got me, meeting with activists and meeting with individuals who had actually not only been, a part of the civil rights movement, but talked to what it really meant to fight for the right to go to school. And so many of these young people, as I started to look, they were coming from communities of color. And I thought, well, are these young people so disconnected? Are we that far from the past? And I was able to identify some business owners who had been truant in their past who wanted to contribute to this program. And so we were able to pull together a pot of money and bring a group of young, of truant youth on a journey to the Deep South. And we met with, civil rights icons of the time, and, made our way through the whole path, all the way to Little Rock, Arkansas, Central High School, where they met with the Little Rock Nine, and it was incredible. It was really moving there. And, I can share that with you because we did document it. And unfortunately, it was an expensive endeavor, but certainly, and so it was difficult to find, funding again. I'd love to do that again. And it certainly required the dedication of a staff and probably a team.
Well, let me ask you, as I hear you describing that program and, given again, and I want to give you an opportunity too, to pivot a little bit to what you're doing now, right, with the Office of Cannabis and the racial equity work that you're doing. Again, in light of the moment that we're in, we have a new rise in these hate crimes directed specifically against Asian Americans and others. Yeah, maybe we can do a virtual tour next. Someone said, yeah, we can go. Yeah, it'd be nice just to see you in action and see the work that you're doing and some of the folks whose lives you've touched. I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about, like, given all that you've seen and all that you've experienced, what are some of the ways that you define justice or equity? How do you? Yeah, you hear that term. Everybody has a different way of thinking about what that means.
No, that's absolutely right. You got it. And actually, before I even go into that, I would like to say, because I did mention earlier that there have been some major USF law alums that have shaped my career. And so as we start to talk now about equity and justice and my pivot into the cannabis space, the city administrator, Naomi Kelly, went to USF as well.
She did. So, she was one of the students in one of my very first classes at USF.
That's right.
Yes.
And so we have you in common as well. Yes. And so I was, I was at the DA's office at the time, and actually, when Prop 64, the legalization of marijuana, came into being, George decided that we needed to be on the right side of history in that space. And so he chose and was the first district attorney's office to retroactively expunge all marijuana convictions. There are some exceptions, but really, ultimately, that's what we did. Over 9,000. Wow. And he did it retroactively. He made it such that individuals wouldn't have to petition the state to get it done. You wouldn't have to hire a lawyer, all the things that make sense, that yes, of course, like let's do this and let's get it right. Let's be on the right side of history. Yeah. And so on the policy team, so what ended up happening is, after my time as a neighborhood prosecutor and starting these programs and developing this stuff, I realized this is where I need to be. And as much as I love the courtroom, and to this day have great memories and miss it, I would pivot into a policy role. And so it was in that space that we did that work. And I'll never forget, Naomi Kelly calls, says, look, we need to get a glass of wine. Okay, great. I do need a glass of wine. Let's go. So we go, we're sitting and we're talking, and she says, like, mid-conversation, what do you think about running the Office of Cannabis? What are you asking me? I said, I'll never forget. I was like, I think you have the wrong Marissa. I'm a prosecutor. You know who you're talking with? He's like, I absolutely know who I'm talking with. And that's exactly why I'm doing this. I mean, talk about a visionary, and the importance of that. And so then the trajectory of my career would shift again, and it would be another great USF alum who would make that happen for me, and will be forever grateful. And here in the moment, I was kind of like, oh, wait a minute, wait, cannabis, stigma, wait, oh, and let me process this. And it was learning about the program, the way that this particular program was going to roll out, that really had me. And I knew that if I didn't take this job, I would regret it the rest of my life. And so San Francisco has made a policy decision to roll out our program in a certain way that prioritizes individuals who have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs. There are a series of criteria. You have to meet 3 of them. You become verified, and then you have standing to apply for a permit. You must at least have 40% ownership in the business. The rest you can seek investment for. Okay. You can do it all yourself, just kind of whatever works. But the first priority went to equity applicants. We're just now finishing processing our equity applicant pool, which is incredible. And to your point in your question earlier, what does equity mean? Yeah. Well, equity in San Francisco is going to mean something very different than equity in Oakland. That's going to mean something very different than equity in Chicago and New York and Atlanta, the Deep South, than everywhere. And for us, it's certainly the community you grew up in, the economic circumstances of yourself, your family. Did you attend a public school here in San Francisco for a period of 5 years straight? Were you or an immediate family member impacted by the criminal justice as it relates to cannabis? Did you experience housing insecurity? Meaning, have you been evicted? Did you lose a housing voucher, right? And these things aren't necessarily the reality of somebody even just over the bridge, right? In Oakland, or certainly maybe not in Chicago, or Los Angeles. Here in San Francisco, it is very expensive to live. I think anyone can say that and agree with that. And a lot of people have been pushed out of their housing and have felt like they've just been pushed out in general. So that is for this particular program and the cannabis program in San Francisco, that is what equity means.
Wow. So when it comes to the racial equity work generally, the working group, the plan that's being worked on, how would you describe what equity is? Is it similar concept, similar way of thinking about what it means? And what is it that, maybe we can pivot to some of the challenges. Like, what does it really look like to try to do racial equity, racial justice? And where do you find the rub, the difficulty, if you can, speak in this cone of silence with all of these people listening?
Right. No, I got it.
So understanding the need for, thinking about all of this. But what can you tell us about, because everybody's talking about doing equity. Everybody's talking about doing racial justice. And it really does mean different things to different people, as you've already alluded, right? It isn't just about trying to have necessarily what we used to think of as equality, absolutely equal programs and processes for all, but really thinking about where individuals and maybe communities sit relative to resources, access to resources, power, experiences, harms they've suffered, and in some way trying to account for those disparities in a way that might, in some sense, feel more like or look more like an equitable response. We're seeing that in the COVID response right now. California's rolled out that COVID equity policy to try to respond to the concerns and the criticisms that have come out about who's getting the vaccine, and seeing that wealthier Californians, wealthier communities had been getting more of the vaccine, and we're trying to disrupt those patterns. So yeah, when you think just generally about racial equity and racial justice and see both the aspirations that folks have and the challenges, what do you see as some of the challenges? And then we're going to open this up, by the way, to any more questions that are coming up from our audience.
Yeah, and I think just to provide a little more context too, so the Office of Cannabis is one of 25 divisions of the City Administrator's Office in San Francisco. The City Administrator's Office, it can be animal care and control to Office of Cannabis, entertainment to contracts. I mean, it's just a very, very diverse group of different divisions touching so
Mhm.
many aspects and having a huge impact on the communities that we serve.
Right. And it's the city administrator's office that's having the racial equity
Yes,
plan working.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we, as an office, the Office of Cannabis, our foundation is in equity, and the equity that I described to you.
Yes.
As a larger office, how do we develop a report on racial equity and shift culture, make changes? That's the bigger question. And so in 2019, Mayor Breed passed legislation that essentially required all city departments to have a racial equity plan by the end of last year, by the end of December 2020. And so it was, again, the city administrator, Naomi Kelly, asking me if because I did come from this background, would I lead this effort through phase one? And really happy that I did. It was a lot of work. And to your point, there are a lot of things that you have to look at. You certainly have to expose where the challenges are, where the feelings are, where the inequities are. And the only way to do that is to create a space where people feel comfortable and free, anonymous, really, to answer questions about how they feel supported or not supported in their work.
So like an audit or a study to just sort of see where things are as a baseline.
Definitely. And I think you can't do this work without an initial baseline. And to your point, it's right now, it's sort of the subject du jour, and many people are kind of looking for support in this space. And I think what's really interesting is, even though it feels like, man, have we been talking about this for a long time, and will we ever change as a people? And can we please, like, stop being racist, right? Like,
right. Can we be done with this?
Can we be done with this? There actually, I don't think, are very many programs, people out there that can have experience in this exact type of work, which is shifting cultures in large organizations, right? Where a lot of it is implicit, where a lot of it you don't know until your point, you get that sort of baseline, and you hear people say, and you see trends. Oh, wow, our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color who work in this space aren't feeling like they have opportunities for promotion. Or we tend to hire from the outside and not promote within, for example. Like things like this, nuances that take a lot of time, right? And intention.
And listening, it sounds like.
Listening and breakout groups and work. And there, you need to create also a space, like an umbrella, so to speak, of forgiveness too, because many of us come to this work not quite knowing the tools, not knowing the language, and not knowing the words, right? And how do we engage in this space and not say the wrong thing? I'd rather not say anything.
Yes.
Right?
So I'm hearing you saying that in addition to getting a baseline and seeing where, frankly, the feelings of racial injustice and maybe the evidence, if you will, of inequity lies in our organizations, we also need to create opportunities to learn, like new language, new ways of describing what the problems are and thinking about it. So we're all learning, we're trying to learn, we're reading, we're doing all of that, going to trainings. But then this forgiveness piece, right? Because recognizing none of us are perfect. None of us is perfect in this. We're all works in progress, right? And so as we learn, we also need to be tapping into, as best we can, that aspect of ourselves that is willing to kind of help folks learn with us. Right. And be on that journey of learning. Forgiveness we have to bring to ourselves as well, right? Because that's part 100%. Of it. Places
100%.
Yeah.
And I would pose to you too, the why, and answering like, why are we doing this? And why is this something that I should engage in? And, because there is this feeling of there being limited resources on this planet, and that not all of us can participate. And it isn't better necessarily that if we do, when in fact, it's the opposite, right? And what are your thoughts in that space?
Yeah.
Like, why this exercise? Why are we doing it?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a very good question and an inquiry. And of course, the question is really put to all of us, I think, because I think you're absolutely right. There are all of these hidden stories about the ideal and the good. I see Mindy saying a shout out. Good to see you too.
Mindy.
Yeah.
That's my classmate.
Yeah. Hey, Mindy. You know, there are all of these often under-acknowledged narratives or stories, frameworks, the baselines that people bring into the conversation. Well, there's a limited pie, and you know, some folks can make it and some folks can't. And people have all kinds of stories, right? There's a big story that often is taught to folks in elite education spaces. That's a story about our history, of our immigrant history, if you will, about the history of every group struggles and every group has their turn. It's sort of it's your turn. It'll be your turn one day soon theory.
Right.
It's a way of holding some of these, the broad narrative of what it has meant to come to the United States, or to have your group participate at a certain time in history and deal with the inequities of that time and try to overcome and try to work. But it also sort of normalizes, doesn't it, a kind of, it's going to be unequal, everybody struggles, and we don't have to work too hard to make it more fair along the way. And so I do think when you talk about changing culture, I do think this conversation and this series of conversations for me is in part about inviting reflection on what is what are the explicit and implicit aspects of legal culture that we are enacting in what we do. So what are the explicit and on the one hand, values of our culture, of our profession, because I always think you have to start with values and ethics. And as you were saying, really thinking about the why. For me, that's a question about what are my deep values? Where do my sense of the kind of legal ethics on the books show up in the work that I do? So I think this lived sense of a vision of the good and the right and the just is always playing out in people's lives. And it's certainly running through legal education and law practice, but some of it, we've got like stated values and the stated mission of the bar, let's say. And then there's like what's happening in the real world, right? And what are our values? And so trying to really be values aligned and kind of ethically inspired. And then realizing that the ethical call of one time and era and community and place may be different for what's happening now. Right now, for example, if we don't see responding to anti-Asian violence as part of the ethical call of our time, I think we're missing something. If we don't see anti-racism work, wow, I mean, given, again, all of the different challenges we see with voting rights and the response to multicultural, multiracial inclusion that's led to a kind of resurgence of voting, attacks on just the right to vote, if we are not willing to really see the way that all of this is inviting us once again to ask, who are we as a multiracial democracy governed by the rule of law? And what is our role as lawyers in that? And if we have normalized racial injustice against certain folks, or seen racial justice work for African Americans in the Black community, but not Asian heritage folks, the invitation always is to reimagine justice, to be thinking, how can we do better today by the people that we're serving today? And so I do think that this conversation and the different parts of the conversation in this series, this is the third in a series of conversations we're having this semester. We're going to have one more on April 15th. We're going to be joined by Gina Cho, who's an expert on lawyer well-being. She wrote a book called The Anxious Lawyer, but she practices law as well. And she's from an immigrant background herself. We'll be continuing this conversation about what does it mean to have the privilege of the education and the professional training that we all have in law, to have the privilege of growing up in a culture that embeds and normalizes these values of democracy and inclusion for all, but to have the courage and that what you have and those who have come through the system and tried to make the best of the system as we find it and leave it a bit better than we found it. How do we, do that, take advantage of these opportunities we have to meet the needs, the really pressing needs presented by the circumstances and challenges of our time. And so how can we think more creatively and courageously about what law, what legal education, what professionalism and professional values might mean? That's what I think this conversation is about. And I see a question, how can we, oh, I see she's amplifying. How can we do better today by the people we are serving today? Yes, thank you so much. My friend and colleague in this work, Dean Carlos, she and I are co-chairing our Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and she's amplifying that. We've just got a few more minutes, my dear, and Marissa, I wanted to hear your thoughts, but I also want to name, I see a question perhaps either in the chat. Let's see, is there one more question that I saw? Maybe I missed that. Kiara, did you have your hand up, my dear? You do? If so, send me your question in the chat. And Marissa, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts coming up in response to what I was saying about this vision of justice and this.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Reimagine it.
I think one thing that I feel has been so powerful just in the space that I am right now, which is the cannabis space, and within this sort of equity program, has been intention of government to be on the right side of history, to say we got it wrong, right? And that's just sort of, in just the fact that I'm a former prosecutor, that I furthered the laws on the book, that those laws were archaic, that they shouldn't have been essentially there to begin with, that we as a society can step back and say, and even as the head prosecutor, and say, not only did we get this wrong, we're going to make up for that. We're going to expunge this, we're going to retroactively do it, and then we're going to create as a city a program that allows individuals who are negatively impacted by this war on drugs to have a chance, right, to have the first opportunity. That shows you that when government, when our legal minds, when folks come together and say, academia, there is a path. First, there was a wrong. We know what that is. We've talked about already a number of what that is, right? There is a wrong. Society has done it. It's continued to perpetuate it. But how do we, one, acknowledge first, and then two, try to get it right, fix it. And it can be done. The day I issued my first permit to one of my equity applicants, I knew that it could be done with true intention, and it actually doesn't cost that much money. At the end of the day, the cost is truly to these lives and people that have been impacted time and time again, our Black and brown community, right? In this particular instance.
Yeah.
And that we can get it right.
Yeah.
And
it takes some courage maybe in trying things and being willing to tweak, trying something, maybe going out on a limb, correcting if we need to. There's a question in the box that I'm sure I'm not going to be able to fully answer here and now. So I'm going to put this question out there and invite us to sort of hold it, because I think the really important value of conversations like this is not necessarily in the specific answers we try to come up with in the moment. Although we may be onto something, but it really is in normalizing having a spirit of inquiry and a space to reflect deeply about important things. And so the question in the box is about the challenge sometimes of putting programs and efforts in place, like really moving from aspirations to action, and discerning what will be the measures by which we determine we've got equity, we've got justice. And again, that's going to be something that might be iterative. The bottom line for you in terms of how you determine an equitable plan in the Office of Cannabis might be different from what another department in the city administrator's office might implement. When it comes to Asian American community members at our law school, thinking about what justice might require in terms of our curriculum, those are real questions that we should be grappling with the questions. The
Absolutely.
Answers we come up with will often be what we call provisional, right? They're the questions for today that we might have, or the answers we come up with for today that we might have to change after we look at what happens in response to that. But it's being engaged, being willing to turn toward the hard questions and to try to make a difference that I think is really what I hope we have the courage to do going forward.
And I would also just add, as far as with respect to our Asian community, one of the things that being a neighbor prosecutor showed me was that these incidents happening now have been happening for some time, and that it's a community that hasn't always come forward about these things, and that there are a number of things at play here, and not to conflate them. but take the time, to your point, to really try to dig in and see where it where it's pandemic related and where it may be rhetoric that was spewed back last year.
That's been
How
around.
we've shifted.
That's been around.
It has been around. And then what was before that, and crimes against the elderly, for example, have been going on for some time, and we've been trying to get to the bottom of it. So I just ask that maybe look deeper and yeah. Thank you
Look deeper.
Look deeper.
Thank you so very much. So very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
As one of my recent current this year students, last semester students on the line. Thank you, Greg. Good to see your name in the box. And thanks for everybody who came today. I know we're out of time now, actually. The hour passes so quickly, you need to wrap up. I see Carolyn's face, that means we need to wrap up. But before we do so, I just want to pause. First of all, thank you so much, my dear Marissa, for taking the time to be with us, to share about your journey, to help inspire our students and looking ahead to the good work out there, everybody, that we're depending on y'all to do. And we're here to support you in every possible way that we can, but know that the world needs you. And thank you again, Marissa, for sharing so much and so beautifully. Thanks to everybody who took time here. And I just want to pause and invite everybody to center into perhaps one word or thought or inspiration that comes up for you as a takeaway from this time, or one thing you learned or are curious about from this conversation that you want to carry forward. Thank you. Thank you all so much. May we be well, may we be safe, may we stay connected and resourced for the journey ahead. Thanks again. And join us again next month. Carolyn, did you want to say details about that, or should I?
Sure. I just wanted to thank both of you so much, Professor Magee and Marissa. This was really just so inspiring, and it was wonderful learning from both of you. And Rhonda, you mentioned our next one is April 15th, right?
15th is the Thursday. Yes, that I think it's tax day. Yeah.
And Gina Cho, you said she co-authored The Anxious Lawyer.
Yes. And so that is, she really does beautifully model bringing awareness practice to bear. She's been a practicing lawyer for many years, doing more corporate work. So we're getting a window into another aspect of practice life. And she's a friend and colleague on the journey, and she's taught as an adjunct here a bit at USF. So she's in our community as well. And yeah, it'd be great to have everybody join us again. Set your calendars. She and I are going to actually record the conversation, and then I'll be on live to answer questions as they come in up in chat. So regardless, we look forward to continuing this conversation. We thank you so very much, because this is what makes USF the kind of vibrant community it is. And we look forward to being.
And don't forget your alums, right? And and tap them for opportunities, because as I showed you, that is the journey.
Absolutely. And thank you, my dear, being one of those alums that we tap and know that, and keep pulling me back into whatever way I can help, as you have before as well. So thank you, my dear. We'll stay in connect.
Thank you. In touch. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Thanks, everybody.